So welcome to Gardener's Question Time as part of the Festival of Discovery. It's great to have you with us. And we've got a particularly distinguished panel for you today. So we have Mark Lane, garden designer, TV presenter and writer, waving to you there. We have Jamie Starkey of Down to Earth, a project which looks to connect people with nature. So, you know, exactly on the lines of what we're trying to do here at Eden. We have Sir Nicholas Bacon, President Emeritus of the RHS and Chair of the Green Canopy, Queen's Green Canopy. And our very own Jake Hawke from the Eden Project, crop specialists in the gardens here. And last but by no means least, Kim McIntosh, who grows our crop displays in the Med biome here at the Eden Project. So without further ado, I will kick off with our first question, which is, everyone will know that COP26 is going on at the moment, and obviously you have the governments of the world trying to do something about climate change. And the question is, at a local scale, what can we do as individuals to be climate positive in our gardens? Who wants to kick us off with that one? Jamie.
I can go with that. So I went up to COP and obviously I went to the green zone and saw some of the exhibitions. And one of the things that was really missing was actually what people can do in their own gardens. And growing our own food is a massive one. And it's not so much growing our own food to be self-sustainable, which realistically you can't really be self-sustainable from your own garden, but you can do a lot. However, the actual novelty of going through the motions and going through and learning about growing your own food, and yeah, the novelty of learning about growing food, and that's a journey that I went on. And going on that journey, I actually learned about food systems and how food systems work and farming. And you kind of go on that journey. I think it's really important, really important. And not just that, it's just really fun. And it's a great way to connect with nature. And doing that and eating your own produce, it's going to help you create a relationship with nature that's going to help you protect nature, because you're going to see that you're connected to that land. Not only that, another point is, one thing that we can do on a bit more of a logical sense is start sequestering carbon in our own soil by practicing no dig and composting our own food waste and kitchen scraps. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jamie. It's a brilliant answer. Anyone else want to jump in on that? So Nicholas.
There's a very good book called Dirt to Soil by A.B. Bryan in America, and it talks about how with regenerative agriculture you can get rid of all inorganic fertilizers and all sprays, and I think that is something which we could really look at quite seriously in the UK. And obviously a lot of people do this already in their gardens, but no dig is obviously the easy one. And I'm a great believer in retaining water. So water butts at the end of downpipes. Well, that's an easy one.
Brilliant. Thanks. I'm going to move on now. I'm moving on from the big serious ones affecting the global climate too. How do you keep on top of weeds in your garden? Do you have any tips? Go on, Mark.
I know we all hate weeds, but I think also let's try and embrace weeds. They still do their thing for pollinators, and you know, they can still be beautiful. But if you really want to get rid of them, obviously you could do things like mulching and try and sort of block out the light. You can cover it up with newspaper. You can cover it up with old shredded paper, your own home compost as well. Also, if you've got weeds sort of growing up in between paving slabs or in gravel, where it doesn't really matter if you're going to spray it with something, but spray it with a homemade remedy and do it with something like baking powder and vinegar, and that will work. You need a couple of attempts at keep going at it, but it will eventually kill the weed off. And of course, there's the good old digging it up and getting rid of it. let's sort of, first of all, embrace them. But I think those sort of simple steps will hopefully mean that people can keep on top of them.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Kim.
Hi. The ones that you can eat them. And there are quite a few that you can eat. Chickweed you can eat, bittercress you can eat, nettles, definitely. And where they don't matter, leave them. It's amazing what you'll find caterpillar-wise, particularly. That'll bless your garden with beautiful little flutteries if you just leave them be.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kim. And there's a really fun game we can all play during this question time, and it's waiting to see when Jake's lights go out, because he's in the library, I can see, and there's a motion sensor, and if it all goes dark on Jake's screen, that's because the lights have gone out.
Yeah, I do apologise for that. I'm trying to do a bit of a dance while I'm.
Great, thanks. So what are the best vegetable crops for a small space? Do you want to come in on that, Jake? Go for it.
Yeah, I think small spot. To be honest, you can grow most crops, even a small patio or a little terrace, stuff like that. I'd say crop-wise, I think alliums are absolutely amazing. Garlics, onions, stuff like that, because they grow upright and they're quite uniform. They don't actually take up a great deal of space. And stuff like radishes are a really good one because you can just whack them in a pot, chuck them up on the windowsill. They don't take up a lot of space. So yeah, a lot of crops like that. Stuff like pumpkins, obviously, they're going to spread. They get quite big. But yeah, stuff like kales, lettuces, even tomatoes, you can get a good sized plant. If you grow it up a cane, it's quite uniform. It keeps to itself. So I'd say alliums are a really, really good one.
Thanks, Jake. Any advances on that? Jamie?
I would also add, one of the things that I think is brilliant is just growing potatoes in a bucket. Like for a first-time gardener, like just putting a couple of spuds, even spuds that have gone like an alien in your pantry, putting them into a bucket in the garden, even on the patio or on a balcony, doesn't matter. Doing that in small spaces, and the harvest that you can get from potatoes is yeah, it's a golden harvest for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. So the next question is, as gardening is known to enhance general well-being, so we've known it ourselves as gardeners for years, but now the science is increasingly backing that up. How might you design or plant a space to maximize its well-being potential? Go on, Mark.
Sorry about that. Well, I do quite a lot with this. I work with many charities where we're always looking at well-being, and both physically and mentally. And obviously what we want to do, we want to promote health and well-being, but also create these wonderful, inclusive and sustainable spaces. And if everyone doesn't know, there's a term called biophilia, which is our love and our innate need to be surrounded by nature. So by having just a garden or any green space that you can sit in is going to benefit you in many, many different ways. When it comes to gardening, there's obviously two types. There's active and there's passive. So if you're an active gardener, then you're physically doing it, so you're getting a good old workout when you're doing that. If you're a passive gardener, then you enjoy it better, sort of just sitting in the garden, maybe with a gin and tonic, and enjoying watching the butterflies and the birds go around. But we know that the evidence is there. It has an effect on our brain chemistry, and it helps relieve our stresses as well. And there are things called positive distractions, and those positive distractions are the things that sort of focus us away from the general day-to-day stuff, so we don't get this mental fatigue. But the important thing is also to switch off, so don't take your mobile phones with you. Trees are really important. I mean, I always love to go and hug a tree. And I also like to spend time, going on for a walk, a wander through forests and things. So wherever possible, try and put trees in. And the trees and plants emit a chemical compound known as phytonicides, which affect the biochemistry within our body and also strengthen our immune system. I think also a lot of us have this sort of emotional attachment with gardens. So a lot of the time people will put in plants that remind them of family members. For example, I have a rose area in my garden where it always reminds me of my grandparents. I hate roses, but I grow them because they're for my grandparents. But ideally, what we want to do, you want to create sort of an interesting route. So you want to create a lovely, interesting route, divide the space up as well into sort of different spaces. So you might have one space where you want to have it to entertain, another space that might be a bit more relaxing with calming colors. You want to obviously create something that's really beautiful. So you want to have lots of color going on, lots of texture, lots of form, and you really want to engage all of those senses. So you want to have tactile plants, you want to have scented plants. And of course, we want to attract the wildlife in. You've got to have a garden that is alive with wildlife. So I think if you can incorporate all of that into your space, then really you're going to be doing a tremendous amount for your physical and mental well-being. And also just remember that if you get into an act, just like weeding, for example, weeding, before you know it, your mind has wandered off and you're having this sense of mindfulness, because you're actually being grounded right there in that moment in time. So there we go. There's a few ideas anyway.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark. That's a brilliant answer. So we have a question on the chat from Sarah in London, and she's asking, she has a small garden. She has issues with fences that block rain and sun, a tree that shades the bed in summer, but is exposed during winter. What can she grow? Anyone going to take that?
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, so it's a small garden. The fence blocks rain and sun. A tree that also shades the bed in summer, but it's exposed during winter. So it's worst of all possible worlds. So shade, something to grow in shade. So exposed during winter, I guess it must be
Grass.
Grass. Yeah. I'm thinking Carex might do it. Something. Go on, Mark.
If I was thinking that if you've got quite a lot of shade, then obviously start thinking about woodland planting. Go for things like ferns, hostas, epimediums, some geraniums, herbaceous type of geraniums as well. And just think about, a shady garden doesn't have to be a boring garden. It can be absolutely stunning and gorgeous, and there are many plants to grow there. All I would say is that obviously if you've got something like a tree, then relish the fact that you've got a tree in your garden, and really make a focal point of it. So you might want to sort of put some planting to actually lead the eye up to the tree. If it's exposed, I'm not quite understand that bit in the question with regards to the exposure. I don't know if that means that when there's no leaf, or if it's near an exposed area, i.e. it's close to the sea or something. I'm not quite sure. Obviously, you've already got your boundaries with your fences, so that's going to help to a little bit. I would also probably introduce maybe some different structures with some shrubs as well. And that would just help sort of break up any sort of wind or anything else that might be coming through into the garden space. So hopefully there we go. There's a few ideas anyway.
Thanks, Mark. Kim, did you want to come in on that? Saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that if unless there's shade throughout, there's nothing stopping having various things in pots and moving those pots around depending upon what season, shade elements, etc. It might require a little bit of shuffling around on a regular basis, but at least you're making the most of your sunny spots, obviously as we go throughout the seasons.
Thanks, Kim. I have a question from Mike Herity. There's a council allotment with a number of charities on site that use it. So have you any suggestions on what their allotment community can do in the winter months when there's not much to grow? Who's going to take that one? What can you get up to in the winter in an allotment? Go on, Jamie.
So we're kind of in a place with our allotment now over the winter, and actually it's probably going to be the busiest time for us because we're restructuring the shape of our allotment, making improvements, putting some water butts in, compost, getting our compost system in, and making a real good, making a really good show of what you can do with everything that comes off the allotment, and practicing that regenerative stuff and no dig gardening, like everything being put into a proper system, composting system, which I think is fascinating. And as a community, to teach and educate people on compost and soil health is brilliant and such a great way to show it. We've got a vermicomposter. We're looking at getting a hot bin. Going to do some bokashi composting, so that's a great thing. Also, over winter, you can start putting your alliums in, like you can put your garlic in, prep your beds, paint some labels. Like there's so many different things that you can do to plan and get ready for the following year. And I know it's not specifically gardening, but it still really is, because you're getting everything ready. And when the time comes to plant and grow things, it's going to make your life a lot easier. And it's a good team building exercise. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jamie. Brilliant. Next, oh, go on, Kim, before I jump on.
With community gardens, I would suggest it's a really good time to sit around and do a proper seed swap. I think we're all guilty of having a drawer somewhere full of seed that we've either got 11,000 carrot seeds that we've accumulated, or just stuff that we've grown once, we don't like it, it doesn't work, but somebody else would benefit from it. And I think seed swaps are really good for getting that communication going as well.
I can't help but buy seeds. It's my worst habit, just buying. I don't need them. I've got loads.
Yes, every gardener knows that one, I think. I think we're all guilty of that. The next question is, so we're in not just a climate crisis, but a biodiversity crisis, and we'll have all heard a lot about biodiversity loss. Can you recommend a plant to give our bees and insects a boost next spring and summer? Good plants for pollinators. Go on, Kim.
I'm going to be hated for this. Ivy. English ivy. Let it go, let it climb, let it do its things. The amount of bees that you get on ivy flowers, and then you've got the berries as well in the winter time. Sitting there watching blackbirds going through that is fabulous. Watching the bees and butterflies feeding on that. What more could you need? It's marvelous. Admittedly, you'll be ripping it out hand over fist at some point, but let it go.
I think that's great, Kim. But also the good thing about ivy is that the bees love it at this time of year as well. So it's a year-long benefit. I would suggest that herbs are a wonderful. They have a lot of food for bees and insects and so forth, and also you can eat them yourself, which is more important, really. But so all in all, I think the herbs as generic plant is a fantastic group of plants which could be used more.
Can I just add, obviously, I would also say go for really simple, open, flat flowers, the good old daisy type flower that we all know, because that's great for pollinators as well. I would also say, try and sow stuff in nice big drifts as well if you can, because then that way you're going to sort of allow those sort of pollinators to come in. And don't just think about the summertime. You know, you can think sort of earlier on, later on, as well as sort of the mid-season as well. So I don't know, something like Pominaria is brilliant for, you know, sort of for early on. Something like the common mallow is brilliant for sort of during, you know, in the mid-season, and then maybe, I don't know, late. I don't know, what can we go for? Something like a French marigold, for example. So, you know, just don't think about one season. You can extend that season and attract your pollinators.
I've had some real good, I say good, we've used borage, we've planted borage once, and it's taken over the whole allotment. Like, and I'm not taking it out because the bees love it and it's so good for the biodiversity. I really struggle, and I find myself getting a bit sparked, but borage is lovely, like really, really, really great. Like, we've seen a lot of wildlife being attracted by it. And as well as that, borage is obviously a great companion plant for when you're growing tomatoes and other veg in the growing space. So borage would be my top one. You'll never get rid of it again, though.
Why would you want to? I'm going to go for a question from the chat now, from Gemma. She lives by a river and she has lots of trees that cause shade. So she wants to know of any plants or shrubs that like being near the water. Go on, Kim.
Angelica. It ticks the boxes as far as pollinators are concerned. You will only ever have to have one plant before you can end up collecting vast quantities of seed for years to pass on to other people. It loves its feet. It loves its feet in water. It was described to me by my grandmother as a ditch plant. But it's fabulous. It's majestic, great big space filler, and loves the shade, loves the water.
Thanks, Kim. Any other ideas for plants that are going to enjoy being on a riverbank?
You can obviously have the lovely forget-me-not. Why not put the forget-me-not in? That will work perfectly happy there. Depending upon how big your area is, I mean, you could go for the lovely yellow flag iris as well, but it will it's a bit of a thug, but it is beautiful when it's in flower. Also, there's a lovely plant called pickerel weed, which has these beautiful sort of blue flowers, which are absolutely gorgeous. So there's a few there anyway. And also Kalmia. Kalmia is a lovely shrub. It likes to have its feet in sort of moist areas. So Kalmia is a really stunning plant, and the flowers are sort of now I always get this wrong, hexagonal in shape, which is even stranger.
Thanks, Mark. The next one is what are your top tips for overcoming slugs and snails? I think every gardener's faced this question at some point. Top tips for slugs and snails. What do you do in the gardens, Jake? How do you keep them away from your crops?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things you can do. I think to be honest, in the garden this year, we've been quite good. We haven't had too much damage. There are certain slug pellets that we're using at the moment which are more natural based, so there's nothing too nasty, and I think a lot of places you can pick them up in at the moment. I think as well, what I've noticed is watching where you're planting. Planting crops alongside hedgerows. Obviously, that's where a lot of the slugs, they'll sleep in there, they'll come out, have a good feed, and then they'll go away again. I've noticed with certain areas with mypex in, where we've had mypex in the area, with an old strawberry patch which has just come out, they'll actually sleep under the mypex. So keep an eye on where you're actually planting and where you're giving them homes. because if you've got quite a crowded area, you've got old pots kicking about, planks of wood and stuff, try and reduce where they can hide, I suggest. I mean, yeah, there are other old alternatives, you know, a sunken bottle with a bit of beer in it to catch slugs. That's always one that I've used at home before. It's quite a good one. Yeah, I can't say too much more on that. I've been very lucky to say that we've had a little bit of damage this year, but not a great deal. So I don't know if anyone else wants to step in.
Kim, I saw your hand go up. Go for it.
There is a lovely biocontrol that involves nematodes. Those will deal very effectively, certainly with the slugs. In my own garden, I tend to use it twice a year, once kind of mid-spring, just as it starts to warm up, and then again last thing, kind of probably around about this time down here in Cornwall, just before the soil starts getting chilly, and that has dramatically reduced my slug issue. And I must admit that personally, it's slugs that I really have issues with, not the ones that are in my compost heap. The ones that are in my compost heap are absolutely fine. It's the little beasties that actually come out and take my new seedlings coming up that I have issues with. With snails, it's a matter of evicting them. And I go out, I don't really care what my neighbours think. I go out with a torch, last thing, pick them up. I know a lot of people will hurl them. Believe me, they come back. Next time I'm off for a dog walk, I take them with me. I have a pot, and I take them with me and I rehome them somewhere else. But yeah, slugs can be a bit of a nemesis at times, but not all slugs are bad. It's just the ones that are merrily munching my seedlings that I have issues with.
That's commitment. That is. Mark.
I've just quickly noticed in the Q&A, someone's asked, what are the nematodes? If you don't, I'll just say, Kim, if you don't mind, they're just like little tiny little microscopic worms. They look a bit like dry yeast. You mix them up into sort of a bucket of water or into a watering can, and then you just water the soil, and then they make their way into the soil, and they find those lovely slugs, and then they lay their eggs inside, and they actually munch them from the inside. I think that was basically it. The other alternative is also another one, is a good old sacrificial plant. In other words, you know, you've got your plant that you really love, but then maybe next to it or around it, you plant some sacrificial plant, like some lettuce. And then, as Kim does, you know, go out there with your miner's hat on and your boots, and then go and collect anything there at night time, and then go and dispose of them accordingly.
And alternatively, like in the old-fashioned way, hedgehogs used to do the job for you. And so if one can generate lots of hedgehogs, then you wouldn't have all these problems in the first place.
Great answer. Thank you, everybody. The next question is one that I'm going to sort of send around the panel one at a time, and that is, what is your favorite gardening manual or website? What's your go-to? What's the one you always go back to? Anyone going to kick me off? Go on, Jamie's. Yep, go on.
So one of the things that I tend to use, especially with growing food and allotment and using no dig, is Charles Dowding's No Dig Diary. I recommend it for people who are wanting to get into growing no dig, and also people who are not as confident in growing as they might think they are. Someone like me, especially, I wouldn't say I'm a professional or anything like that. I just go with the flow, and that kind of book, having that structure, telling you what to grow, when to grow it, and how to grow it. Using Charles Dowding uses biodynamic, biodynamics as well as a no dig, the no dig way of growing, and it's interesting, and it's really helpful. It's really helpful because it tells you when to grow when to grow it, how to grow it, and what's coming up next season. It's got dates that you can plan things next to. For someone like me who is not very organised, it is very, very helpful.
Great. Can I just ask a question, Jamie? I think it relates to something you said earlier when you mentioned a hot bin. And someone's asked in the chat what a hot bin is.
So a hot bin is basically, it's like the Daleks that you get, but you can get them made out of it's like a polystyrene kind of material. It's a lot sturdier and a lot harder. And obviously it's black, and it comes with a little temperature gauge on the top. But because it's made of this insulation, it decomposes organic matter a lot faster than your normal compost bins necessarily would do in like a natural environment. And this is something that you want to use when you've got weeds or unwanted flowers in your garden that you don't necessarily want back on the allotment or the growing space. So having a hot bin, it helps kind of kill it off, kill its kind of fertilization off, and also will help turn that into to mulch and turn it into compost. It's not specifically nutritionally dense to put back on your beds, but makes really good mulch and top cover.
Thanks for clearing that up. Mark, your favorite garden manual or website?
Well, I love history, but I also love just seeing how other people garden differently. So for me, it's William Robinson's Wild Garden. For me, that sort of, I mean, I love Grave Tie, and it just, for me, opened my eyes when I was learning about plants and learning about garden design, and sort of that understanding of almost what we're trying to do now, what we're all trying to do, and make our gardens a bit more wild. I know it was slightly different then, because obviously it was this reaction to all the bedding plants that were going on. And also the types of plants that he was introducing into his gardens in some places. But for me, that's sort of been this primer that I always go back to, and I always just, if I make myself a cup of tea, I just always dive into it. It's a lovely book.
Thanks. Jake, your favorite book or website?
It's a bit of a struggle for me. I'm definitely a trial and error kind of person. I think everyone who's growing should always trial out the plants. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And sometimes, a lot of the time, you'll be surprised. But I know when I started growing veg, a couple of the books I used to read were by James Wong. And it was, I believe it was Grow Your Own. And it's just a nice little book, good pictures. It just gives people a few more extra ideas of ways to grow, how much you can grow in small places. And it just gives a bit more of an idea of different things you can grow in varieties, really. And I think that's the big thing, is a lot of people don't think there's certain things that they might have spotted in the supermarket that they can't grow in the back garden. I mean, a really good one is Inca berries, or I think it's Physalis peruviana. It's a gorgeous berry, beautiful parcel. Ornamentally, it's stunning. But eating-wise, it's absolutely, it's one of those berries. It doesn't taste like anything else. It's very unique. And it's something that if you see, you don't think it would be grown here. But yeah, like his book says, I believe it's in the book, you know, it's as soon as you start it off on a windowsill and pop it into the back garden, it grows quite happily. But yeah, that would be my book to get people started, just to give a couple little ideas.
Lovely, thanks, Jake. Sir Nicholas.
Well, obviously, having had 15 years at the RHS, I should mention the fact they've got quite a good website, rather comprehensive on that whole subject. But the fun about the thing is that you can send up bugs, beetles, diseases, nasty-looking leaves, and so forth, and they will tell you exactly what the problems are. So that's quite a good website. And my current thinking is obviously with the Queen's Green Canopy, which is the project to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, with the planting of trees. And on that website, there is all the basic information about how to plant a tree, and how to nurture it, which is much more important than actually planting it. And at the end of the day, I rather agree with Jake that I just stick it in and hope for the best. And that's usually the best way to deal with these things.
Thanks very much. Kim?
Mine would be a flashback to my childhood, and it kind of reminds me of where it all started, really. And that's John Seymour's Complete Self-Sufficiency. There's a whole load of weird and wonderful Heath Robinson wacky ideas in there, particularly as far as sort of like cloches for carrots over winter and things like that. But yeah, it's sort of, if I have a question, if nothing else, it takes me back to my childhood, and then I kind of remember various things that I've learned growing up, and it normally ends up in a weird way directing me to the person that I need to actually ask a question of rather than anything else. But it's yeah, it's an insight into the 1970s, I think. It's great.
Lovely. Thanks, Kim. I've got that one on my shelf as well. So I'm going to go for another question from the chat, which is ideas on how to get young people interested in gardening, especially linking with climate change. Who wants to take that one on? Jamie?
So this is something that we do in Derby with Down to Earth, and something that obviously something that I got into because of my connection with growing food and gardening. And I think the thing is, without being too cliche and cheesy, we have to make it trendy. We have to make it cool. We have to make it accessible. First and foremost, we have to make it accessible. And that doesn't mean making it accessible just physically. It also means psychologically. So making them connections, helping people make them connections with what it's all about and how they can get a benefit and a benefit physically and mentally from it. So them kind of things, we think they might be difficult, but they're not. But we like to make loads of rules. We like to, for me, for instance, going back in my memories of childhood, don't tread on the grass. Don't touch these flowers, don't touch these plants, don't touch this, don't touch that. I remember going to a botanical garden in Amsterdam and walking around there, and they have signs telling you to touch, taste and smell practically everything. And that is so important. That is so important with nature. We see ourselves as separate from nature. Obviously, these guys on the panel, people who are coming into this conversation, people who visited Eden, will know and understand that we are part of nature. The problem is these people don't believe they're part of it, which is so sad and so mind-blowing, but it's true. So helping people find that connection with nature and being that arm around the shoulder and supporting them and making it accessible, it's vital. It's vital.
Brilliant.
Can I add, Jamie's dead right. I call it scratch and sniff. I think it's really important when kids come around the garden to tell them just to scratch and sniff and pull and if necessary, taste. And also to ask them to come back in 3 weeks' time having sowed some seeds. And I think the extraordinary seed of the sunflower, for example, that out of that seed you can get an enormous thing, 8 foot high. Just if they can remember as far back as that, then that is a remarkable thing.
So important, isn't it? Kim?
Anything that they like to eat. So it might be something as simple as just growing some pea shoots. We often end up giving kids something like radish seeds, and I know very few children that like eating radishes, whereas something like pea shoots tends to do the trick. Either that or growing something along the lines of aloysia, lemon verbena, that's actually a scratch and sniff. Try this, grow that, water this. Getting that result and then getting them involved in the preparation of food. So something as simple as I have a pile over here of my little salad seeds. Just getting them to do that the stuff that they like to eat is what you need to target, because if they can grow it themselves, that's what triggers that enthusiasm. It's theirs and they can eat it.
Yeah, brilliant. Go on, Mark.
Just one from a different angle is houseplants. Get the kids to start to grow some houseplants. And obviously cacti are brilliant to start off with because they are funky, they look a bit odd, and they don't need a lot of care and attention. So, you know, they're a great thing to go for straight away. But if you, as everyone's been saying, it's about getting the child or the kids or the younger people to actually start to care and nurture for that plant. And as soon as they start doing that and they can see it growing and they can see the benefits of what they're actually doing, then that's what really counts.
Thanks, Mark. Brilliant answers. I love it. Question from Becky Barrett. They have a large facing Victorian conservatory. It gets very hot in summer, very cold in winter. They have a few succulents and some pelargoniums, but what else would thrive in these conditions? Go on, Mark.
There's a lovely plant called the ZZ plant, or Zamioculus ameifolia, which is looks rather funky as well. It's quite succulent, but it's pointy leaves, the really glossy leaves. It's absolutely stunning. The good old spider plant. Don't forget the good old spider plant. You know, stick a spider plant also in a room, and it will get rid of any horrible toxins in the air within 1 hour. It's an incredible plant. And also, what about the mother-in-law's ton, the good old snake plant? You know, these are all wonderful, good old house plants that aren't going to kind of just sort of die on you. They're going to look great. And if you want some flowers, then what about a bromeliad? Wonderful bromeliads are really good as well because they're very easy to grow.
Thanks, Mark. Kim.
Out of season salads. In the winter time, get your tray sewn up. I shall go and get this. This is something that anybody can do in a tray. There we go. This is what we ate about a week ago. This is what we're going to be eating this evening, up to there, and then I'm going to be eating that in a couple of days' time. It is a tiny tray. It's in the greenhouse. I can't do this outside at the moment. It's just too wet. It's too cold. But that is all it takes. You can grow your Christmas salads in something like this in a conservatory that's got extremes of temperature. Eat it.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you, Kim. So I'm going to go for another question from the chat, which is top tips for persuading people to move away from peat-free compost, which amazingly you can still buy. And do you have any tips for compost teas, things like that, or anything at home you can use as an alternative? Who's going to take that one on? Go on, Mark.
I gave a talk about this actually quite recently, and you know, I think the shocking thing is that unless it says peat-free on the bag, I think it's around about most compost bags will actually contain anywhere between 70 and 100% peat. I know we're getting better, but they're still out there. So wherever possible, and only really buy compost that has the word peat-free on it from a garden centre. When it comes to growing mediums for your garden, then obviously if you make your own homemade compost, that's really good. Leaf mold is also really good. You can start mixing it up and blending your own mixes. Coir is really handy. It doesn't have any sort of nutrient in it, but it's good for sort of starting plants off. But also adding into other mixes to sort of loosen it up and get air in there as well. So there's a few ideas. And also, what about the wonderful wool composts that are around? Wool composts are absolutely brilliant. They don't need as much watering because they hold on to that water, and I think that's sometimes the problem when people buy the wool composts. They water as they would normally do, and the plants sort of give out, sort of die, because you're basically drowning the poor thing. So there you go. There's a few different alternatives, but it's always about look for peat-free and only buy peat-free.
Thank you, Mark.
I would agree with Mark, but I do think with coir, it comes from quite a long way away. And so I would tend to stick with the wool rather than the coir.
Excellent point. Next question's got Kim written all over it, which is what's the best way to prune olives?
Well, it depends what you want out of them. Obviously, if you just want them to be an ornamental, then you're going to be pruning them to fit the shape that you want them to be. If you want them to fruit, then it's a matter of taking off the uprights, the big uprights that will come off, trying to open it up and decongesting those little shoots that you get all clogging up on the inside. It entirely depends what you want your olive to do.
Go on, Jake.
We've got a couple olives outside at Eden under our canopy, and my favourite, well, what I prefer for olives, once they get to a good sizing, the branches actually start to droop, is I'll try and get Sam back to this one. Is if you've got them planted in bed, is to find a height so you've got a good air space underneath. And I like to trim all the way around an umbrella. And personally, for olives, I think that umbrella look, it looks very clean, very tidy, but also it gives a good airflow underneath. And especially if you've got underplanting, if you have them planted out, is, you know, thinning out the branches so that you're actually getting light in. So that you obviously your olives have got enough to survive and look good, but also you've got a good air and light quality underneath, so you can plant it with low planting herbs or any plants like that.
Thanks, Jake.
Could I just mention that olives are the host plant of Xylella, so one's got to be very careful where you buy olives from, and to make sure that the nursery is certified in plant healthy or whatever, because we don't want Xylella in this country.
Absolutely. Excellent point. Thank you. The next question I have, which is the best ground cover plant to keep weeds down. So we had a question earlier about weeds. So once we've got them, how do we get rid of them? This one's about how do we stop them getting there in the first place? Anyone got a good ground cover plant to recommend? Go on, Mark.
Pachysarda terminalis. It's a lovely evergreen growing, low growing plant. Also has a tiny little sort of flower as well. It's great as that sort of first sort of understory, and it just looks nice all year round.
Thank you. Jake, your hand went up.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of chamomile. I think it's a lovely spreading plant. It looks absolutely amazing. Gives off beautiful flowers. Also, any creeping like thymes. I think it's plants that they creep, they spread out. You will get the odd weed growing through, but they do suppress quite a bit. With the added bonus that obviously you can use them as herbs and they smell absolutely incredible.
Thanks, Jake. Kim, did I see your hand creep up?
No, but if it's in a veg patch, this is going to sound crazy. We eat so much rocket, so a bit like I have in the med biome, rocket. Ever so easy to pull up when it's gone absolutely rampant, and you can eat it. And if you've got too much of it and you're pulling a whole load up, you can whiz it down through a food processor and make an absolutely cracking pesto and freeze that.
Lovely. Thanks, Kim. And this is, oh, go on, Sir Nicholas.
I just think vinca is something that is a wonderful plant, smothers everything, and how you get, Jake, chamomile to grow to cover the ground is remarkable, because I don't seem to be able to make any headway with that at all.
Thank you. So time has flown. We are now nearly at the end of our session. I'm going to do one more question before we close. And thank you all for sending in such great questions, which is a recommendation for a winter flowering tree or shrub. We always think about flowers in spring and summer, but what about winter? Any suggestions? Go on, Mark.
A wonderful plant that I actually have outside my front door is Prunus subpetella ex terminalis. Sorry, let me start again. Prunus ex subpetella autumnalis, which is a lovely ornamental cherry. It will flower from November all the way through to March, but obviously a bigger flourish in March time. But it's a beautiful, beautiful ornamental cherry.
Yeah, that's Jamie, is that you? No. Sir Nicholas, did your hand go up?
Well, I always think that Hammermill in February, or January and February, because I'm a sort of bit of a snowdrop geek, to have snowdrops underneath yellow Hammermill is fantastic. And you can't forget the scent of a Sarcococca, because to me that is just remarkable that they exude that sort of scent in the coldest months of the year.
Thank you. Kim, you're unmuted. Is that? Yes, go on.
Oh, I'd go for the winter flowering honeysuckle. Lonosera fragrantissima. I've got right. They can be very straggly, but if you hit on the pruning and don't mind too much about a little bit of straggle outside your front door of a winter, when just at that point where it starts getting really, really chilly and horrible, every time you come in and out of your front door, you will get a waft, and it's stunning, absolutely stunning. I look forward to the chilly months purely for the scent of that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kim. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today for Gardener's Question Time as part of the Festival of Discovery. And thanks once more to our panelists, Mark Lane, Jamie Starkey, Sir Nicholas Bacon, Jake Hawke and Kim McIntosh. And enjoy the rest of the Festival of Discovery. And we will see you again at some point in the future here at the Eden Project, we hope. I should just mention as well, our Queen's Green Canopy here at Eden, that Sir Nicholas is part of. We're at Eden planting 70 trees in our car park. So where we have different names of fruit for our car parks, like apple and plum, we're going to be planting those to match those car parks. So if you're here at Eden at some point in the future, you'll see the results of Nicholas's good work. So thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.